Hey there. You hear the city before you truly see it. A hushed chaos that settles over 5 points as the sun slips behind the tangled rooftops. Imagine the kind of night where every shadow might be an ally or a threat, and the secrets tucked in these grimy alleys could change the fate of the city. Tonight, you're about to uncover a twist that rewrote the rules of survival here. The kind of story that's rarely whispered outside these streets. If you find yourself drawn into this world of midnight intrigue and battered dreams, feel free to stick around and join the journey. And since this is a global midnight gathering, drop a comment to share where you're tuning in from and what hour the city's clock strikes for you. For now, dim the lights, pull that blanket tighter, and let yourself drift into the heart of old New York. 5 points, New York City, mid-1800s. You stand at the edge of a muddy intersection, boots slick with the runoff from a dozen overflowing gutters. It smells like rotting cabbage and spilled gin, and the air vibrates with a strange, restless energy. You see children darting between horse carts, their faces streaked with grime, while women haggle with a produce vendor over a crate of wilted turnips. The vendor's voice rises above the din, sharp and insistent, as if volume alone could conjure a miracle from his battered wares. You catch the scent of wood smoke and something older, sourer, a reminder that the city's refuse collects in corners faster than hope can sweep it away. The buildings here seem to lean in, crowding you closer to the center of the chaos. Each brick tenement is a patchwork of peeling paint and boarded windows. Some doors promise warmth and shelter, others nothing but trouble. You can feel the city's pulse beneath your feet, a slow, relentless thrum that never quite lets you forget how close you are to danger. In 5 points, survival is never a guarantee. Poverty presses in from every side, and you realize quickly that everyone here is fighting for a place to stand. You see a boy no older than 10 slip a loaf of bread from a distracted baker's stall, vanishing down a side alley before anyone can shout. It's just another day in the city's most notorious slum. The contrast between rich and poor in New York is impossible to ignore. Uptown, gaslights shine on polished shoes and tailored coats. Down here, you make do with whatever you can salvage from the gutter. The city's promise of opportunity is a cruel joke for most who wind up in 5 points, especially if you arrive with nothing but an accent and a battered hope. Irish immigrants pour into this neighborhood, hoping for a new start. But what they find is a world as unforgiving as the one they left behind. You step aside as a group of men lurches past, their laughter edged with something hard and mean. No professional police patrol these streets. Instead, the city relies on a patchwork system of watchmen and constables, men who are often more interested in staying out of trouble than keeping the peace. You hear the clatter of a nightstick somewhere nearby, but it's quickly drowned out by a brawl erupting in a side alley. The police force, as you know it today, doesn't exist yet. In these years, the city trusts its safety to whoever is willing to look the other way for a price. As you wander deeper, it becomes clear that order here is a matter of who can gather the most friends, or the fiercest ones. The Irish newcomers, desperate for solidarity, form tight-knit gangs. They are met by native-born New Yorkers who see the immigrants as a threat to their own fragile footing. Tensions simmer, then boil over, And out of the chaos rises a new kind of gang, fiercer, more organized, and unafraid to carve out their own piece of the city. You pass a watchman leaning against a lamppost, his eyes glazed and uninterested. He barely glances at a group of rowdy teenagers jostling each other in the mud. In a place where law is just another word for luck, these so-called guardians of the night are little more than stage props. The real power belongs to those who know how to work the angles, or at least how to disappear when the trouble starts. Suddenly, a name crackles through the crowd like a secret. The 40 Thieves. You spot a few of them, their coats a little sharper, their eyes a touch more cunning than most. Even outside New York, people are starting to talk about this gang. By the end of the 1820s, their reputation has grown so large that it reaches far beyond the city's borders. Their specialty is picking pockets and slipping through the cracks of the city's defenses, and their fame only seems to make them bolder. The street erupts with a sudden commotion. A drunk stumbles into the gutter, chased by a girl wielding a wooden spoon. The crowd erupts in laughter, but the moment passes quickly. Here, every spectacle is a brief distraction from the grinding uncertainty of daily life. You notice a small, ragged boy watching the scene with hungry eyes. He turns away, vanishing into the crowd, and you wonder just how many stories like his are swallowed by the city every night. A sudden shout draws your attention to the corner, where two men square off beneath a flickering gas lamp. Their argument is lost in the general din, but the tension is unmistakable. You feel the air thicken, expectant, as if the city itself is waiting to see who will blink first. In 5 Points, disputes are rarely settled with words alone. The city has a way of forging its own rules. And tonight, you sense that something bigger is brewing. A new rivalry, a fresh line in the sand. You step back to take in the whole chaotic tableau. The grime, the noise, the constant negotiation between hope and desperation, it all feels strangely familiar. Maybe the city's heart has not changed as much as its skyline. That realization settles over you, heavy as a winter coat. The world of 5 Points is not just a relic of the past. It's the echo of every city corner where survival hangs by a thread, and where the rules are rewritten by those bold enough to try. Something has shifted. The gangs are growing bolder, their names whispered in both fear and fascination. The old boundaries are dissolving, and the city is on the verge of a transformation that will ripple through its streets for decades to come. As you glance down a narrow alley, you catch the glint of a knife and the quick, practiced movement of a pickpocket at work. It's a reminder that in New York, the line between legend and reality is often just as thin as the morning fog. It's dusk, and you find yourself squeezed into a dim saloon, the air buzzing with laughter, curses, and the clink of mismatched glasses. 5 Points, New York City. Dusk, inside a battered saloon packed with rough-edged regulars, and the sharp scent of spilled gin. You shift your weight on a stool that seems determined to collapse, elbows brushing against the threadbare coat of a boy who can't be older than 15. The lamplight flickers over faces, pale, bruised, hungry, but lit with the wild spark of anyone who's managed to survive another day in this city's underbelly. Here, friendship is as valuable as a hot meal, and twice as hard to come by. You're wedged between a pair of Irish lads, their brogues thick as the steam rising off the stew pot in the back. Their names are Owen and Mick, names as common as the rats darting beneath the tables, and used just as often to avoid the attention of the law. Owen's talking low, voice rough from pipe smoke, spinning a story about the night the Bowery boys tried to muscle onto Baxter Street. The tale grows with every retelling. By now, the boys apparently came armed with pistols, hatchets, and a sack of live eels. You can't help but laugh at that last addition. The truth? It hardly matters. In 5 points, a good story is the best armor. But listen closely, and you'll hear the edge beneath the laughter. Every joke has a target. Every toast is a warning. Survival means knowing who's at your back and who's waiting for you to turn around. Turf isn't just a patch of sidewalk. It's the difference between eating tonight and going to bed hungry. That's why these early gangs, the likes of the Carrionians and the Dead Rabbits, cling together so fiercely. Their bonds are born of necessity, but rivalry always simmers just beneath the surface. Petty theft, alleyway ambushes, and midnight raids are the currency of youth here, traded with the same casual spite as insults over a cheap pint. The saloon's door swings open, letting in a gust of foul air and a half-dozen more boys, their faces flushed from the cold. They shove in beside you, all elbows and bravado, shouting for the barkeep to serve them. Something strong enough to make them forget the day's failures. Outside, the streets are a muddy tangle of pushcarts and horse droppings. But in here, the world shrinks to a single room crammed with dreams and desperation. You can almost taste it. The tang of spilled whiskey, the sour sweat of bodies pressed close, the constant threat of violence humming in the background. You try to keep your head down, but it's impossible not to notice the way the room divides itself. One table is thick with Carrionians, their accents sharp and their tempers sharper. They're united by more than just poverty. County loyalty runs deep, and so does their hatred for the English. It's a bond that can turn deadly in an instant, especially when a Bowery boy shows his face. The Bowery boys themselves are easy to spot, their hair slicked and coats cleaner than most, talking loud about politics and what they'd do if they ever ran this city. That's the thing about New York's gangs. The lines they draw in the dirt are as much about pride as they are about territory. Every gang mirrors the city's own tangled web of politics, religion, and desperate ambition. You catch Owen's eye as he jerks his chin toward the corner, where a group of dead rabbits are gathered around a battered table. Their ringleader, a stocky kid with a scar that splits one eyebrow, is regaling his friends with the story of how their gang got its name. He claims it started when a rabbit carcass, still red and ragged, was hurled onto a meeting room floor during a heated argument. Instead of recoiling, someone picked it up and declared, with a drunken flourish, that they'd rally under any banner, even a dead rabbit. The others howl with laughter, but you sense a strange pride in the way the story is told. This isn't just a joke. It's a badge of honor. The laughter is cut short when an older man with a constable's badge pushes through the crowd. His cheeks flushed from drink or anger, it's hard to say. He scans the room with watery eyes, trying to look menacing, but no one takes him seriously. In 5 points, the so-called guardians of the law are as likely to be paid off as to make an arrest. The watchmen and constables might flash their badges. But in these slums, their authority is little more than a bad joke. You watch as the constable accepts a mug of ale from the barkeep and takes a seat in the corner, more interested in warming his bones than keeping the peace. The message is clear. If you want protection, you'd better find it among your own. You lean back, letting the noise wash over you, and realize this is how it's always been. The city's swelling tide of immigrants, especially the Irish, flooding in since the 1840s, has turned every alley into a battleground. Each new arrival means another mouth to feed, another rival to watch, another story to outdo. The promise of America is written in the dirt under your fingernails, but so is the hunger that gnaws at your belly. For every boy in this room, gang life isn't about glory. It's about not getting swallowed by the city's endless appetite. A sudden crash draws your attention. A glass shattering against the soot-stained wall. Mick stands up, face red, shouting in a mix of English and Irish that you only halfway understand. He's toe-to-toe with a Bowery boy, their argument about a crooked dice game threatening to spill into a brawl. For a split second, the whole room holds its breath. You can feel the tension, thick as the smoke that curls from every pipe. Fists clench, chairs scrape. Someone mutters that it's about to go off, and for a moment you wonder if you should duck under the table or join in just to prove you belong. But then, with the kind of anticlimax only 5 points can deliver, the barkeep slams his hand on the bar and bellows for calm. He threatens to throw everyone out and lock the door, which would mean spending the night in the freezing street. The crowd groans, and the fight fizzles out like a cheap firework. That's the rhythm of life here. Danger always lurking, but rarely erupting all the way at least, not tonight. Everyone relaxes a little, and conversation resumes. Only now, the stories are told in lower voices, eyes flicking to the door. You glance around and realize how quickly the alliances in this room could twist. 1 minute, you're sharing a drink. The next, you're watching your back for someone you called a friend. Even among the Carrionians, who share a hatred for the English, with the kind of heat that could start a kitchen fire. You sense the constant threat of betrayal or sudden loyalty shifts. It's survival of the cleverest, not the fittest, and everyone knows the rules could change by dawn. As the night grinds on, the saloon empties out in fits and starts. You step outside, boots sinking into the muck of Mulberry Street. The city seems to breathe around you, a living, wheezing thing, coughing up gangs and legends with every new wave of arrivals. You know the stories you've heard tonight will grow in the telling, just as the gangs themselves grow in the shadows. In 5 points, you're never just a bystander. You're always one wrong look away from being swept up in the chaos. The wind bites at your face as you wander deeper into the maze of alleys, the echo of laughter and threats still ringing in your ears. Somewhere ahead, the name 40 Thieves drifts through the dark, spoken with the kind of mixture of awe and dread, usually reserved for ghosts or kings. You move toward the sound, curiosity pulling you onward, and wonder what new stories the city will demand of you before sunrise. 5 points. Dusk. The air thick with the scent of boiled cabbage and cheap gin. You, a cautious wanderer, are hemmed in by the crooked shadows of tenements and the flicker of gaslights. You shuffle down a mucky alley, the echo of your boots swallowed by the city's constant murmur. On one side, a cluster of boys huddle, their voices low and urgent, passing a battered flask. The name 40 Thieves drifts from their lips, half whispered, half spat, like you'd say the name of a storm that might blow your roof off or just rattle the shutters. Even if you're new to New York, you already know this crew's infamy stretches beyond the city limits by the late 1820s. The 40 Thieves have a reputation that grows every time a pocket is picked, or a constable comes up short on his nightly rounds. The way people talk about them, you'd think they were some kind of folk heroes, if folk heroes wore threadbare coats and specialized in lifting handkerchiefs and the occasional silver spoon. Across the street, a rowdy knot of men barks out laughter that ricochets off the crumbling brick. The accents are thick, Irish as a pub on payday, and the story's louder than sense. A bystander leans in, never too close, and mutters, "Carryonians." The word lands somewhere between admiration and a warning. The Carryonians are less a criminal syndicate, more a club of countrymen who've swapped the green hills of Ireland for the grey gutters of New York. They're known for boisterous brawls, not organized larceny, but you wouldn't want to cross them after dark. Their meetings spill out of smoky back rooms, sometimes ending with broken glass and black eyes, but rarely in court. The rumor is, if you're looking to start a proper gang, you could do worse than to study their camaraderie. A sudden commotion grabs your attention. Down the block, a pair of young men in red flannel shirts, garments that shout for attention even in the half-light, swagger past, sleeves rolled, hats tall enough to scrape the low arch of a tenement doorway. These are the Bowery Boys, unmistakable in their uniform of dark trousers tucked into boots and those stovepipe hats, as if Abraham Lincoln had decided to moonlight as a street tough. The Bowery Boys aren't here to blend in. They walk with the confidence of men who believe the city ought to kneel before native sons. Their disdain for immigrants, especially the Irish Catholic newcomers, is as clear as the shine on their boots. The Bowery Boys have a style all their own. You catch snippets of their talk, mocking, brash, delivered with a sharp New York twang. They make a show of patrolling their turf, casting glances at the Carryonians that are equal parts challenge and contempt. Here in 5 Points, street corners are more than geography. Each one is a border, a line drawn in the dirt, and every group you pass is staking its claim. The tension between these crews is a living thing, lurking in the alleyways and springing to life when a bottle shatters or an insult flies. The city, you realize, is a patchwork of rivalries, stitched together by necessity and pride. You edge deeper into the warren of lanes, the city's pulse quickening with every step. Above you, laundry flaps on sagging lines, while below, a trio of boys plays dice, eyes darting for any sign of the law. You hear the telltale clink of coins and the low, urgent mutter of bets. In this world, fortune changes by the minute, a roll of the bones, a careless slip of a purse, a favor traded for silence. Suddenly, the alley brightens as a door swings open to reveal the warm, golden glow of a saloon. Inside, a bartender with arms like ham hocks wipes down the bar, barely glancing up as a new argument erupts. The aroma of spilled whiskey and sweat hangs heavy in the air. Here, alliances are forged over mugs of rockgut, and grudges fester in the corners. You recognize a couple of 40 thieves, one missing a front tooth, the other with a scar like a question mark curling down his cheek, nursing drinks and eyeing the door. They trade stories about the night's haul, each tale taller than the last, but you notice every eye flicks to the window at the sound of heavy boots. You step outside again, the night air thick as stew. A distant church bell tolls, marking the hour, but time feels strange here, measured less by clocks than by the rhythm of street fights and stolen wallets. This is a city where survival depends on knowing which block you're on and who claims it after dark. The Bowery boys, with their cocky strut and blazing shirts, seem to own every inch of ground they cross. The Carrionians, for all their rough humour, are quick to rally if one of their own is threatened. And the 40 thieves, they slip through the cracks, invisible until your pocket is suddenly lighter. A scuffle breaks out just ahead. 2 Bowery boys square off against a pair of Irish lads, maybe Carrionians, maybe just unlucky souls in the wrong place. Voices rise, fists clench, and for a moment it feels like the whole city is holding its breath. The fight is over fast. A flurry of blows, a shout, then the crack of boots on cobblestone as the losers scatter. You watch as the victors dust themselves off, one Bowery boy adjusting his stovepipe hat with a flourish that borders on theatrical. In 5 points, every brawl is a performance, every bruise a badge. If you squint, you can see the bigger picture. This is not just petty crime or youthful bravado. The city is changing around you, swelling with newcomers, each wave of immigrants pressing into the teeming streets and crowded tenements. The Bowery boys dig in, determined to keep New York for the native-born. The Irish form their own circles, clubs, and, when pressed, gangs, to defend against a world that seems to view them as interlopers. Here's an unexpected twist. In the midst of all this chaos, some of the fiercest rivalries are less about money than about respect. A single insult hurled across a saloon can spark a night of violence. A stolen hat or a bruised ego might redraw the invisible boundaries of a city block. The law, when it arrives, is usually too late, and sometimes, you suspect, on one side or another. In this world, the real currency is reputation, and every gang wants more of it, whatever the cost. You pause under the flickering street lamp, savouring the momentary quiet after the fight. The city feels alive in a way that's hard to describe, like it might swallow you whole, or carry you along, if you can just keep your wits about you. The grime on your boots is proof you've been here, in the thick of it. You realize that every brick and cobblestone is marked by stories just like this. Turf wars, alliances, betrayals, and the relentless scramble for a sliver of dignity. Now and then, you catch the glint of a constable's badge, or the distant clatter of a carriage, reminders that the city's march toward modernity is unstoppable. But for now, in these cramped, noisy streets, the gangs hold sway. The 40 thieves are more than just pickpockets. They're legends in their own time, shaping the city's myths as surely as its skyline. The Carrionians remind you that even a rowdy club can command respect, if only for their wild loyalty. And the Bowery boys, well, their stovepipe hats are as much a symbol as a uniform, warning newcomers that this city will not be tamed without a fight. You can feel the tension rising, the city holding its breath for the next spark. The stakes are more than just money or turf. They're about survival and identity in a city that never looks back. As you drift further from the alley, you sense that the night is far from over. On a chilly night, you watch as a pair of watchmen shuffle down the lane, swinging lanterns more for show than protection. The name 40 Thieves drifts from their lips. The 40 Thieves have a reputation. 5 Points, New York City, 1842. You stand just outside a ramshackle alley, breath curling in the crisp air, as a pair of watchmen lumber past, swinging lanterns, with all the gravitas of children playing at pirates. Their heavy coats hang loose, boots scuffing puddles of something that might have started as water. In this part of the city, you sense, the line between slush and sewage is more of a suggestion than a rule. The watchmen's uniforms are mismatched, badges askew, and one leans in to mutter to the other. You catch only a scrap, something about keeping their heads down till morning. The city, after all, does not pay them to be heroes. Here, in the belly of 5 Points, you realize that these men are not so much guardians as spectators, their lanterns more likely to catch the flicker of a rat than a criminal. For all the talk of law and order, you feel the real power shifting in the shadows behind them. A few feet away, behind a stack of crates, a pair of boys, no older than 12, dart across Mulberry Street, faces half hidden by tattered scarves. They move with the urgency of creatures who know every shortcut and hiding place. You watch, heart quickening, as they slip past the watchman with barely a breath of hesitation. The boys exchange a grin, the glint in their eyes suggesting that they've just relieved a drunk of his pocket change. The watchmen, meanwhile, continue their route, lanterns bobbing, oblivious to the minor heist happening in plain sight. You are left with the uneasy sense that, in 5 Points, the official presence of the law is more punchline than promise. You turn your gaze to the tenement windows above. Candlelight flickers through greasy panes, illuminating silhouettes hunched over meager dinners. Every so often, a muffled shout drifts down, swallowed up by the clamor of the street, the clang of a distant horse cart, the shrill laughter of a group of young men clustered outside the Shamrock Saloon, and somewhere the distant crash of a bottle meeting cobblestone. The city is awake, restless, and you feel the tension hang thick as the smoke that curls from every chimney. If you squint, you can make out clusters of men, some in battered top hats, others in shirt sleeves despite the cold, huddled at the mouth of Paradise Square. These are the early gangs, their names whispered with a mix of fear and awe. The Dead Rabbits, the Bowery Boys. Their loyalties are as tangled as the alleys themselves. But one thing is clear. The real law here is whoever carries the biggest stick. There is no professional police force to break up the brawls or chase down thieves. Instead, the city relies on a ragtag collection of watchmen and constables, men who, as you have seen, are often more interested in staying out of trouble than stopping it. You realize that, for many in 5 Points, the watchmen are simply part of the background noise, like the yowling of alley cats or the clatter of dice in back rooms. At the Shamrock, the door swings open, and out stumbles a man known as Mickey, a regular whose nose is as red as the Irish flag. He barks a laugh, slaps the back of a friend, and shouts something about showing those Bowery boys what's what. You catch the phrase "dead rabbit" tossed around, sometimes as an insult, sometimes with a wink. The meaning is slippery, but the intent is clear. It is street slang for someone rowdy, a troublemaker, a thug with a reputation for never backing down. In 5 Points, being called a dead rabbit is both a badge of honor and a warning label. You inhale the scent of cheap liquor and wood smoke stinging your nose. Your eyes water, but you spot another group, neatly dressed, hair slicked back and boots polished, standing apart by the lamplight. These are the Bowery boys, strutting with a swagger that says they own this stretch of street. They watch the Irish lads with open disdain, muttering about foreigners and Catholic rabble. The Bowery boys pride themselves on being native-born, and they do not hide their resentment toward the waves of Irish immigrants pouring into the city. Tensions crackle as thick as the frost on the windowsills. Every corner seems to host its own drama. On one, a pair of dead rabbits argue over turf, their voices rising above the din. On another, a Bowery boy sharpens his knife on the curb, never taking his eyes off the alley across the way. You cannot help but notice the way the gangs eye each other, sometimes with open hostility, sometimes with the wary respect that comes from sharing the same unforgiving streets. The air is electric with the possibility of violence, but for now, the rival factions are content to circle and posture, each waiting for the other to blink first. Suddenly, the mood shifts. A bottle shatters, and a shout goes up from the Irish side. The Bowery boys respond with jeers, and for a moment you brace yourself for chaos. But then, in a twist as abrupt as it is anticlimactic, one of the watchmen, startled from his daydream, steps forward and waves his lantern with exaggerated bravado. Everyone freezes, the gangs exchange glances, and then, as if on cue, they scatter into the alleys, laughter trailing behind them. The watchman exhales, relief written all over his face. It is clear to you now that the only thing these men are good at dispersing is tension. This is the rhythm of 5 Points: threat, retreat, repeat. The stakes are survival and reputation, carved out night after night in a city where the rules are fluid and the players change with the tide. You pause, reminded that nothing here is permanent except the grime. Even the street names shift, painted over by city officials desperate to erase the district's infamy. But the gangs adapt. Like the rats, they multiply and thrive, feeding off the chaos and the city's failure to protect its own. A gust of wind cuts through the alley, carrying the sound of distant church bells. You glance back at the tenement doors, where a young mother ushers her children inside, casting a wary look at the street. For families like hers, the gangs are both shield and threat, sometimes protectors, sometimes predators. You wonder, just for a moment, what it would take for someone to choose a side. Then, in the hush that follows, you notice a scrap of paper fluttering at your feet. Scrawled across it is a crude drawing, a rabbit, dead and grinning, with a stick clutched in its paw. The message is clear. In 5 Points, even the jokes carry a warning. As you step away, the city seems to exhale. The watchmen resume their aimless patrol. The gangs melt into the shadows, and the night reclaims its uneasy peace. But just over the rooftops, a new day is waiting to break. and you already sense the city's story is about to change. The balance of the night has shifted. Soon, at the harbor, new faces will step ashore, and the city will have to decide once again who belongs and who gets left out in the cold. New York Harbor, dawn, with you jostling your way through the salty morning air and the clamor of a dockside crowd. The sun, still lazy, glints off the water and picks out the battered hull of a ship groaning against its moorings. You barely dodge a horse cart that rattles past, hoofbeats sharp against the stone, and catch a wild mix of Gaelic curses and half-whispered English as families pour onto the wharf, faces pale, eyes darting, clutching bundles that look like they've barely survived the voyage. You step aside as a woman shepherds 3 children around a crate stamped with the word Liverpool. The youngest grips her skirts, nose twitching at the unfamiliar stink, brine, sweat, and something sharp, almost medicinal. The city seems to inhale, taking in these newcomers, then hold its breath. All around, 5 Points is waking up, and you can feel the shift, like the street itself is bracing for a wave. The Irish are not exactly greeted with open arms. You watch as a group of locals, shirt sleeves rolled and eyes narrowed, size up the arrivals. One mutters something about papists under his breath. The Irish families keep moving, determined, but you can spot the unease in their shoulders. In the 5 Points slum, suspicion is a local currency. Some old-timers scowl, but others, especially those who remember arriving with nothing themselves, nod in quiet solidarity. There's a flicker of hope, too. New hands mean new allies, and in these streets that can mean survival. The city's population is swelling, more bodies in every alley, more voices on every stoop. You hear that in the clatter of boots and the scrape of crates being loaded onto carts, and you see it in the way every inch of space is claimed. A corner for sleeping, a stoop for cooking, a spare patch of sidewalk for selling apples that look like they've been through a small war. It's noisy, pungent, and dense enough to make you feel like you're breathing through someone else's sleeve. And it is changing, fast. In the 1840s and 1850s, ship after ship unloads a new wave of Irish faces into Lower Manhattan, swelling New York's population by the thousands. You push your way towards the heart of 5 Points, the notorious crossroads where Mulberry, Anthony, and Orange Streets collide. Here, the noise is a living thing. Shouts, clanging pans, the bray of a donkey, and, always, the low buzz of tension. The Irish newcomers are easy to spot, their clothes a little plainer, their skins still flushed from the Atlantic crossing. You realize quickly that for them, the real journey is just beginning. Every block is a trial. Every glance could be a challenge or an invitation. Over near a battered saloon sign, you spot Mick, a local with a sly grin and a coat 2 sizes too big. He leans in, lowering his voice to a confidential whisper. "See those fellows?" He nods at a knot of men across the street, all red vests and slicked hair. "That's the Bowery boys. Think they own the place." You size up the Bowery boys. They swagger, hands on hips, laughing too loud, their eyes quick to scan the crowd. They're not just any street toughs. Half of them also fight fires by night, volunteer firemen in battered hats, convinced they're the city's true guardians. For them, the swelling tide of Irish Catholics feels like an invasion, and they're not quiet about it. You hear jeers tossed at the newcomers, words spat like seeds, each one carrying a warning. The Bowery Boys are famous for their rivalry with the Dead Rabbits, the Irish gang that claims 5 Points as its own. You catch a murmur about a street fight last week, a wild, muddy brawl that spilled out from Paradise Square and left the cobblestones stained. Someone claims the Dead Rabbits carried their mascot, an actual dead rabbit stuck on a pike, paraded through the chaos like a banner. The image is so absurd, you almost want to laugh. But the way it's said, dead serious and a little proud, makes it clear this is no joke. You pause at the edge of a noisy saloon. The door swings open, releasing a gust of sour air, cheap liquor, sweat, and the aroma of fried onions struggling for dominance. Inside, men crowd the bar, voices rising and falling like the tide. A fight could start here over anything, a spilled drink, a sideways glance, or just the wrong accent at the wrong time. You feel the tension, thick as stew, and wonder if the city has always been this close to boiling. Not everyone in 5 Points is looking for a fight, of course. You spot a pair of Irish women haggling over bread with a German baker, laughter cutting through the gloom, and, for a moment, the street feels almost festive. But beneath it all, there's an edge. The city's divisions are hardening. Irish against native-born, Catholic against Protestant, 5 Points against the Bowery. The newcomers are forced to choose sides fast. Loyalty is a shield, and isolation is a risk no one can afford. You hear talk of turf wars, lines drawn in the grime, defended with fists, clubs, and sometimes worse. The Bowery Boys patrol their stretch of Broadway, ready to jeer or brawl, while the Dead Rabbits hold 5 Points like a fortress. The city doesn't have a real professional police force yet, so order is what the strongest say it is. If you want help, you'd better have friends who swing a mean stick. A sudden commotion draws your eye. A crate tumbles, apples rolling underfoot, and a scuffle breaks out between 2 boys, one in a patched Irish coat, the other in a Bowery Boy's red vest. The crowd surges, eager for distraction. You can't help but notice how quickly sides form, how every face becomes a symbol, us or them, friend or foe. It's not just about turf. It's about who belongs and who is just passing through. Just as the energy crests, a wiry old man with a broom sweeps his way through the chaos, grumbling about the mess. The spell of tension breaks for a moment, replaced by laughter at the sight of him chasing stray apples with more determination than most men show in a fight. It's a small reminder that, for all the drama, daily life in 5 Points is a string of scrapes and small survivals. You take a breath, feeling the city's pulse, fast, erratic, impossible to predict. The arrival of the Irish has changed the stakes, and the streets are shifting beneath your feet. You sense that nothing here stays still for long. Now, with the morning chaos fading into the din of midday, you catch the sound of raised voices near Mulberry Street, and you realize you're about to be swept up in the city's next dramatic turn. Mulberry Street, midday. You stand wedged between 2 human walls, each one bristling like a row of porcupines, spines made out of elbows and tempers instead of quills. On one side, the native-born New Yorkers, Protestant, stiff-collared, and looking like they inherited the city along with the family Bible. On the other, the Irish immigrants, Catholic to the core, their accents thick as the stew simmering in third-floor tenement kitchens. You can taste the tension in the air, sharp as vinegar and twice as sour, as both sides cluster close, hurling insults and the occasional rock across the muddy divide. A bottle shatters against a lamppost, sending a spray of glass and cheap gin onto your boots. The shouter nearest you, a Bowery boy with a hat perched at a cocky angle, points his finger at a group of Irish lads. "Back to Cork with you," he yells, voice cracking. The Irish answer with a jeer, one of them brandishing a stick that has seen enough brawls to develop its own personality. Here, the city's lines are drawn not in sand, but in mud, thick, brown, and impossible to scrub out of your cuffs by supper. No need to check a map. You are at the epicenter of 5 Points, the infamous slum where the city's worst poverty and wildest ambitions tangle together. The air is heavy with the smell of boiled cabbage, sweat, and just enough whiskey to make you dizzy if you breathe too deeply. Every window above you glares down with the suspicion of 3 generations. Some faces peer out, eager for the show to start. Others pull curtains tight, hoping to keep the violence at bay with a scrap of faded fabric. This isn't just a squabble about who gets the last potato. The crowd is split along lines, as old as the city itself. The native-born New Yorkers, think English and Dutch descent, with surnames that have been carved into city ledgers since the days when Wall Street was an actual wall, feel the city slipping away from them. The Irish, fresh off the boats and driven by hunger and hope, press in from every angle, their numbers swelling with each passing week. The result is a powder keg that lights up every few days, sometimes with nothing more than a sideways glance. You glance down as your foot squelches in something that is definitely not just mud. The streets here are grimy, the gutters clogged with refuse, and the ghosts of 1,000 arguments. A passing cart kicks up a spray of filth, and you dodge back just in time to avoid a baptism by horse manure. Overhead, laundry flaps between tenements, white sheets stained yellow from coal smoke, like surrender flags no one remembers to lower. Suddenly, a chant rises up from the Irish side, low and rhythmic. At the center, a figure hoists something skyward, a dead rabbit, limp and grotesque, skewered on a pike. The dead rabbits have arrived, their mascot as subtle as a punch to the jaw. You lock eyes with a bystander, and for a moment you both wonder if this is bravery or just very committed branding. Either way, the message is clear. The gang is here, and they mean business. The dead rabbits are not alone in this carnival of chaos. Across the way, the Bowery boys puff themselves up, their red shirts starched and bright, as if detergent could wash out the city's sins. Their leader, a man with a jaw like a shovel, grins wide enough to show every tooth. The Bowery boys are the self-appointed guardians of the real New York, determined to keep the city for Americans, never mind that their own parents probably arrived with nothing more than a trunk and a prayer. A stone whistles past your ear, and you duck instinctively. The air is thick with more than just dust. It crackles with the threat of violence. The two sides inch closer, shoulders squared, fists clenched, every insult a spark in a city already parched for a fight. It's not just about turf. It's about survival, about proving who belongs in this sprawling, filthy, ever-changing city. Someone behind you mutters, "It's always the same. Bowery boys on one side, dead rabbits on the other, and us stuck in the middle." You nod, because in 5 points, neutrality is just another word for target practice. The gangs have carved up the city like a pie, each slice marked by blood, pride, and the occasional animal mascot. The street is their stage, and every brawl is a performance, complete with an audience peeking through cracked shutters and half-open doors. You hear the thud of fists meeting flesh, the yelp of someone catching a knuckle to the nose. But the fight is more than muscle. It's a contest of identities, native-born against immigrant, Protestant against Catholic, old money against the desperate new. Each punch thrown is a vote for a future that looks a little more like one side and a little less like the other. For a brief second, you picture a modern-day block party where the only weapons are water balloons and stale potato salad. That idea dissolves quickly as another bottle arcs overhead, smashing near your feet. The gangs of this era are no joke. Their names, Dead Rabbits, Bowery Boys, might sound theatrical, but their grudges are carved deep. The Bowery Boys march in formation, their discipline military, their swagger impossible to ignore. The Dead Rabbits, meanwhile, fight with the wildness of men who have nothing left to lose. A dog darts between the fighters, yelping, chased by a boy who seems more interested in the scraps of food dropped during the melee than the fight itself. Life in 5 points is nothing if not inventive. You wonder how many of these boys will be tomorrow's gang leaders, and how many will simply disappear into the fog of the city, another nameless casualty of the ongoing turf war. Just as you think the tension will snap, a police whistle pierces the din. For a moment, everyone freezes, caught between pride and self-preservation. The police, often outnumbered, sometimes as corrupt as the gangs themselves, swoop in, swinging clubs and shouting for order. Their uniforms are stained, their faces pinched with worry and exhaustion. The crowd scatters, some slipping into alleys, others ducking into the nearest saloon, where the smell of cheap liquor offers a temporary refuge from the chaos outside. You find yourself pressed against a doorway, heart thumping, as the street empties in a rush of footsteps and curses. The air is suddenly still, heavy with the aftermath of a conflict that will, inevitably, flare up again. The only sounds now are the clink of broken glass and the distant laughter from a barroom where, for the moment, the only fighting is over who pays for the next round. You step out, shoes sticky, adrenaline fading. The city feels different now, as if the ground itself is holding its breath. You realize that the gangs are not just a symptom of New York's problems. They are a force, shaping the city's future, carving out identities in a world where everything can be taken away in an instant. A gust of wind carries the smell of whiskey and burnt bread past your nose. Somewhere a bell rings, signaling a new hour, a new shift, a new chance for another brawl. The lines are redrawn in mud, and you, caught in the middle, have just witnessed how quickly survival can turn into spectacle. In the aftermath, you spot a scrap of cloth caught on a fence, red, tattered, a badge of pride for whichever Bowery boy lost it in the fray. The compass shifts. The boundaries of 5 points are never fixed for long. As dusk settles, you spot a line of Bowery boys swaggering down the avenue. 5 points. Dusk. With a squad of Bowery boys strutting down the avenue. You can pick them out even through the thick Manhattan twilight. Red flannel shirts glowing under the gaslight. Boots thudding against the uneven cobblestones. Stovepipe hats poking above the crowd like chimney stacks on legs. You feel the prickle of anticipation, the kind that rides the night air when something is about to go sideways. The Bowery boys are not here to save kittens from trees. Most of these men are volunteer firemen by day, but after dark, their idea of a good time involves less water and more swinging fists. They swagger in tight formation, laughing too loud, talking too big, and glancing sideways at every passerby with that look that says, "Go ahead, make me." Style is not just a statement for these men, it is a warning. The red shirts are as much armor as attitude, a uniform that declares their turf and their tribe to anyone with eyes. You keep to the edge of the street, pushed by the tide of bodies spilling out of tenements and saloons. The stench of cheap whiskey, sweat, and horse manure is thick enough to taste. Somewhere, a baby wails from an open window, and a dog barks at nothing. But all eyes are drawn to the Bowery boys as they cut through the muck, the kings of their own stretch of misery. You catch a flash of conversation as they pass. One Bowery boy, his hat tilted at a defiant angle, spits into the gutter and says, "If those Irish rats show their faces tonight, it'll be their last mistake." The others snicker, boots scraping on the stone. You know exactly who he means. The Bowery boys have made a sport out of harassing the new arrivals, especially the Irish Catholics who flooded 5 points in search of something better than famine. To the boys, immigrants are competition, threat, and favorite punching bag all rolled into one. There is no room for subtlety in these streets. You spot a cluster of dead rabbits lurking near a battered lamppost, eyes narrowed. These are the Bowery boys' polar opposites, Irish, Catholic, and proud of it. The rivalry between these two gangs is not just about territory or pride. It's about who belongs in this city and who gets to make the rules. The air is thick with unspoken threats and old grudges. There's a reason the word tension feels almost physical here, like a rope pulled tight between two fists. You hear a rumor float down the avenue. Tonight, the dead rabbits are planning something big. The Bowery boys must have caught wind, because their swagger has an extra edge, as if each man is daring the night to start something. You feel the city itself holding its breath. A sudden shout rings out from the next block, and the Bowery boys surge forward as one. Boots splash through puddles, hats bobbing like red buoys in a sea of chaos. You rush to keep up, ducking past a barrel-chested man who smells like gin and sawdust. The crowd parts just enough for you to see two rival scouts squaring off, faces inches apart, hands curled into fists. One Bowery boy, red shirt stretched tight over his shoulders, yells, "This is Bowery land. You want a piece, you fight for it." A bottle sails through the air and shatters against a wall, its contents mingling with the sticky river already flowing in the gutter. The line between bystander and participant vanishes. You're pressed so close to the action you can taste the adrenaline on your tongue. The Bowery boys form a phalanx, boots locked, ready for a street brawl that is as much performance as combat. Suddenly, there's a twist. One of the dead rabbits steps forward, brandishing what looks like a gruesome totem. It's a dead rabbit, impaled on a pike, held aloft like a flag. The sight is so bizarre, so grotesquely theatrical, that for a heartbeat, even the Bowery boys hesitate. You hear someone mutter, "That's their mascot, right?" The answer comes in a low, hard laugh. "Yeah, means they're here for blood." The crowd ripples with shock, then a nervous energy. You realize the power of symbols in these streets. The dead rabbit is not just a joke. It is a declaration of intent, a warning that this will be no ordinary scrap. Later, you'll hear someone claim that the dead rabbits got their name when a rabbit carcass was thrown onto the meeting room floor during a heated argument. The men took it as a sign, either of bad luck or ferocious determination, depending on which side of the pike you were on. Chaos breaks loose. Fists fly, boots kick, and somewhere in the melee you lose your footing, stumbling against a pile of broken crates. You scramble upright, heart pounding, as the Bowery boys and dead rabbits clash in a flurry of curses and swinging clubs. It's hard to tell where one gang ends and the other begins. Red shirts and ragged coats blur together, illuminated by the flickering light of a nearby saloon. The fight spills into the street, drawing in anyone foolish enough to be standing close. You catch glimpses of faces, a Bowery boy with a split lip grinning like he's won the lottery, a dead rabbit swinging his pike with wild abandon. This is not a fight for money or even revenge. It's about survival and identity, about drawing a line in the filth and saying, "This is ours." The Bowery boys are fighting for a version of New York that feels like it's slipping away. The dead rabbits are fighting for a chance to belong at all. For a moment, you wonder what it would be like if these gangs had social media accounts. Imagine the Bowery boys posting grainy selfies in their stovepipe hats. Hashtags like "No Irish need" apply. The dead rabbits would probably start viral challenges. Can you carry a dead rabbit for 3 blocks without getting punched in the face? The absurdity makes you snort, but it's not so different from the turf wars of today. Only the platforms have changed. A whistle blows in the distance, distant but sharp. The police, or maybe another gang looking to take advantage of the chaos. The Bowery boys break formation, some melting into alleyways, others dragging the wounded to safety. The dead rabbits retreat in a loose knot, their rabbit mascot still bobbing above the crowd. In the aftermath, the street is a mess of broken glass, splintered wood, and blood smeared across the cobbles. You wipe your brow, realizing you've made it through another night in 5 points. This is how street gangs earn their reputation, one brawl at a time, fueled by poverty, pride, and the need to be seen. The Bowery boys will be back tomorrow night, red shirts washed and hats dusted, ready to defend their slice of New York against anyone who dares challenge it. The dead rabbits will plot their next move, always looking for a sign that this city might finally be theirs. Tonight, you've witnessed more than a fight. You've seen how style becomes armor, how symbols turn into rallying cries, and how every scrape on these grimy streets is a battle for belonging. The air still smells of liquor and sweat, the noise of the city never quite dying down. In 5 points, every sunset brings a new story, and just as you think you might catch your breath, you duck into a smoky back room where the dead rabbits gather, a dead rabbit hoisted on a pike and paraded like a twisted mascot. That look that says, "Go ahead, make me." Style. If those Irish rats show their faces tonight, it'll be their last mistake. The others. That's their mascot, right? The answer. 5 Points, New York City, dusk. In the back room of a creaking saloon, you crouch among the dead rabbits, every sense alive. It's the kind of place where the walls sweat with spilled whiskey, and the floors are sticky with secrets. Your boots stick to the warped planks as you edge past the battered table, where a trio of rabbits are deep in argument over a pile of crumpled bills and what looks suspiciously like a stolen hat. Overhead, a single gas lamp flickers, casting shadows that jump and twist like the stories circling this room. In the center, someone hefts a dead rabbit on a pike, parading it as if it's the crown jewel of Manhattan. The animal's fur is matted, its eyes glassy, but the gang treats it with reverence, half mascot, half warning. Some say this whole tradition started when a rabbit carcass crashed through the window during an especially rowdy meeting, flopping onto the floor like a challenge from fate. No one bothered to clean it up. Instead, it became their banner, a badge of the wildest fighters in 5 Points. The room smells of cheap liquor and sweat, with a sour undercurrent that clings to your nostrils. Conversation sloshes between English and Irish, punctuated by laughter sharp as broken glass. You catch snippets about a rival gang up on the Bowery, and suddenly the talk turns to the Bowery boys, the sworn enemies of every rabbit in this room. The Bowery boys, you're told, aren't the sort who hide behind shadows. They swagger down the street in red flannel shirts, dark trousers jammed into boots, and stovepipe hats that make them look like angry wedding cakes on legs. You picture them now, strutting past tenement doors, heads held high, faces flushed with the kind of pride only a homegrown New Yorker can muster. Most are volunteer firemen, which means they know how to handle a pike and aren't afraid of a little smoke. Someone slams a fist on the table. The noise jolts you back. A grizzled rabbit with one ear leans in, voice low. Them Bowery boys think this city belongs to them, but they don't know what it's like to fight for every crust. You realize this isn't just about turf. It's about identity, dignity, and the raw, daily scramble to survive. The Irish here are newcomers, battered by poverty and eyed with suspicion by every so-called nativist gang wandering the avenues. The Bowery boys see themselves as defenders of old New York, American-born, bristling with anti-immigrant pride. The rabbits, meanwhile, turn that contempt into fuel, each back-alley brawl a small act of rebellion. There's no shortage of tension. On some nights, it boils over into the streets. The dead rabbits pour out of their smoky lair, rabbit pike aloft, voices raised in a roar that echoes down the alleyways. You step outside with them, feeling the city's pulse quicken beneath your feet. The air is thick with the scent of coal smoke and the tang of spilled gin. Windows rattle as the parade passes, and somewhere a child peeks out from behind a curtain, eyes wide with a mix of fear and awe. Here in 5 Points, every block is a patchwork of allegiances. The Carryonians down the lane? They're more of a rowdy club than a true gang, content to drink and brawl, but rarely picking sides. The real line is drawn between the dead rabbits and Bowery boys. Every alleyway, every battered stoop, is a potential battlefield. You pause for a moment, breath catching at the clang of a distant bell. It's not a church bell, but the alarm from a firehouse, the Bowery Boys' territory. The rabbits stiffen, eyes darting, as if the sound itself is a summons to arms. You can sense the rivalry tightening, a cord stretched taut between these two worlds. Suddenly, a young rabbit darts to the window, peering out into the gathering gloom. "They're here," he hisses. The room falls silent. Outside, a line of Bowery Boys advances, stovepipe hats bobbing above the crowd. They move with the discipline of men who've spent years hauling hoses, boots crunching in unison on the filthy cobblestones. This is the concrete twist. You'd expect a brawl, but instead the two gangs stop short. For a heartbeat, the only sound is the sizzle of a lamp inside the saloon. Then, in a gesture that feels more ritual than rage, the dead rabbits lift their pike, rabbit limp but defiant, while the Bowery Boys tip their hats in mocking salute. The message is clear. The war is never over, only paused. The consequence is simple. Tonight there will be no blood, only the silent promise that tomorrow's sun might rise on a very different scene. You step back into the smoky room, heart thumping. The rabbits break into nervous laughter. Someone cracks a joke about the Bowery Boys' hats being tall enough to hide in. The tension doesn't vanish, but it softens, replaced by the shared knowledge that survival here is a game of nerves as much as muscle. In the hush that follows, you notice the layers of grime on the windows, the faded wallpaper peeling in strips, the way each face in the room carries its own story of arrival and struggle. Some are boys barely old enough to shave. Others have the haunted eyes of men who've seen too many nights like this. You wonder, just for a moment, if any of these rivalries will matter in another decade, if the city itself will remember who ruled which alley, or if all that will remain are stories traded in backrooms like this one. For now, though, the legend of the dead rabbits grows. Every time the pike is raised, every time the Bowery Boys respond with their fireman's bravado, another layer is added to the myth. In a city that never sleeps, reputation is everything, and so is the art of surviving until dawn. You hear the saloon door creak open, and the night's chill creeps in. The city outside is restless, its streets alive with secrets and shifting loyalties. You glance at the rabbit on its pike and realize it's more than a mascot. It's a warning, a challenge, and a promise that tomorrow's fight is never far away. Night falls, and you find yourself pressed against a crumbling wall as the Bowery Boys and dead rabbits face off under flickering lamplight. 5 points, late evening, on a soaked stretch of Mulberry Street with Bowery Boys and dead rabbits converging by the lamplight. You wedge yourself between a brick wall and a pile of rain-slimed barrels, heart thumping like a runaway horse. The air is thick, part fog, part the lingering scent of spilled gin and sweat. In the glow of flickering gas lamps, shadows stretch and shrink across the cobblestones. Bottles arc through the air, their glass shattering in a chorus that outpaces the noisy saloons behind you. A brick whistles past your ear and thuds into the street, close enough to promise a headache for anyone less lucky. Tonight, pride is currency, and territory is the only map that matters. The Bowery Boys, all slicked hair and brash swagger, pour in from the north, their sleeves rolled to the elbow, faces set into practiced sneers. You catch a glimpse of Red Tom, his nose already bleeding, but he wipes it with the back of his hand like it's nothing more than a drizzle. Across from him, the dead rabbits, mostly Irish kids with battered hats and wild eyes, form a ragged line. They shout in a mix of brogue and New York bark, daring anyone to cross the invisible boundary between the 5 Points and the Bowery. Each gang is a patchwork of accents, tempers, and tattered jackets, stitched together by loyalty and the promise of not being the one left behind. A bottle smashes at your feet, splattering your boots with sour liquor. The stink is sharp, almost medicinal, and you wonder how anyone could drink the stuff. But here, cheap whiskey is more than a drink. It's the glue of alliances and the spark for a dozen brawls. Someone to your left yells, "No nativist'll run us out," and the words hang in the air, heavy as the humidity. The Bowery boys answer with jeers about Irish rats and foreigners stealing bread. You can practically taste the tension, metallic and bitter, like blood on split lips. This is not just a fight over a dirty street. It's a nightly referendum on who belongs in this city and who is just passing through. A sudden shriek cuts through the shouts. A girl you recognize as one of the dead rabbits' lookouts. Hair wild, eyes wide with something that might be glee. She hurls a stone with impressive aim. It catches a Bowery boy on the shoulder, and he crumples, only to leap up again, grinning as if he's won a prize. Here, pain is almost a badge of honor. You realize that for many, the bruises are the only trophies they'll ever earn. Every swing, every curse, is a line in the unwritten rulebook of survival in 19th century New York. The gangs aren't fighting for riches. They're fighting because no one else will claim them. For the Irish newcomers, the dead rabbits are family when blood relatives are still across the Atlantic. The Bowery boys, mostly native-born, see themselves as New York's gatekeepers, determined to keep the city in their own image. You duck as a brick skips off the lamplight post, sparks flaring in the gloom. The crowd swells, bodies pressing together, each person jostling for a place on either side of an invisible line. The noise is a wave, rising and breaking, a surge of boots stomping, glass crunching, and curses hurled with the force of a thrown stone. Above it all, the city's wealthier citizens sleep behind heavy doors, insulated from the chaos by distance and dollars. You think about the mansions uptown, where gaslight is a warm glow and not a warning beacon. Here, in the 5 Points, lamplight is more like a challenge. Step into its glow, and you're fair game. A sudden lull falls, not silence, but a tense, expectant hush. Both sides hesitate, eyeing each other, breath steaming in the cold. You spot familiar faces, boys who had begged for coins that morning, now wielding sticks like knights. A woman with a bloodied apron who once sold you bread, swinging her fists as if she's chasing away rats. This is the new generation of New York's underbelly, forged in the pressure cooker of poverty and prejudice. The Bowery boys' leader, a tall, sharp-jawed man with a battered stovepipe hat, steps forward. He raises his voice, half threat, half invitation. "You lot want our street? Earn it." The dead rabbits answer with a roar. And for a moment you wonder if you're watching a play, except that tonight's script is written in bruises and broken glass. Just as the gangs seem poised to charge, A dog darts into the fray, mangy, ribs showing, but tail wagging like this is the best party in town. The animal weaves between the fighters, snatching up a dropped sandwich from the gutter. For a heartbeat, everyone watches, dumbfounded. The tension cracks, laughter rippling through the crowd. Even Red Tom grins, blooded teeth flashing in the lamplight. The dog bolts, prize in mouth, and the spell breaks. The brawl resumes with renewed energy, but you sense a subtle shift. Tonight, even in violence, the city's absurdity finds a way in. The fight morphs into a series of tangled skirmishes. Two boys wrestling in the mud, a pair of girls hurling insults sharper than any knife, a group of Bowery boys trying to upend a barrel onto their rivals. You edge along the wall, boots slipping on the muck. Every sense is on high alert. The stink of the gutter, the slap of fists on flesh, the heat of bodies pressed close. In this moment, you are both witness and participant, swept up in the current of New York street history. A bottle clatters to a stop at your feet, and you stoop to pick it up. Empty, but heavy. You could throw it, join the fray, but something holds you back. Maybe it's the realization that here, every action is a declaration of loyalty, of defiance, of the simple will to keep standing. You notice that the faces around you are not just anonymous mobs. Each one carries the mark of their struggle, a torn coat, a missing shoe, a bruise blossoming under an eye. They fight for scraps, for respect, for the right to call this filthy stretch of street their own. Above the din, a distant bell tolls the hour. Midnight. The gangs, sensing the shift, begin to scatter. Some slink into the shadows, others limp away, arms draped over shoulders in rough camaraderie. The street is littered with broken glass, torn hats, and the odd chicken feather. You breathe in, the air now tinged with the coppery scent of blood and the sharp tang of victory, or at least survival. Tonight's fight is over, but the war for New York's soul is only just beginning. As you step away from the wall, you realize you've witnessed more than a simple brawl. You've seen the city's unwritten rules scrawled in bruises and laughter, in the way even a stray dog can break the tension, if only for a moment. The boundary lines are redrawn, but they'll shift again tomorrow. In 5 points, nothing is permanent except the struggle. Later, in the flickering light of a back room, you spot Hellcat Maggie sharpening her teeth with a file. Back room, 5 points, late evening. You stand wedged between a swaying coal stove and a circle of dead rabbits, the air thick as stew. Hellcat Maggie sits across from you, her brass claws catching the lamplight while she files her teeth with a patience that would unsettle a dentist. A laughter slices through the low mutter of the room, and you notice that even the toughest lads give her a respectful berth. The walls are tar-stained and close, the smell of spilled gin mixing with damp wool, and the ever-present staleness of sweat. If you listen closely, you can pick out the clatter of dice in the next room, punctuated now and then by a curse or a burst of laughter. You're in the thick of it, the city's underbelly, where legends walk upright and sometimes bite. Every gang here has its own myth, but Hellcat Maggie's is the kind that gets whispered even when she's in the room. Her brass-tipped fingers tap a beat on the table, shiny as a magpie's dream, and her grin holds just enough menace to keep the bravado in check. For a moment, you wonder what it takes to survive in this crowded, cutthroat world. Then Maggie winks. and the thought drifts away like smoke from a cheap cigar. The dead rabbits gather around a battered table, their coats patched, boots scuffed, faces a patchwork of old bruises and mischievous pride. Someone passes a jug of rot-gut whiskey, and you feel the warmth burn straight down to your shoes. The talk turns to names, as it so often does in these circles. One fellow, red-nosed and quick with a story, claims the gang's name was born when a rabbit carcass landed smack in the middle of a heated meeting. Nobody knows if it was tossed in anger or as a joke, but the name stuck like mud on a boot. You can almost picture the scene, men glaring, tempers boiling, and then, thud, a limp rabbit, an omen or a punchline, depending on who's telling the story. The dead rabbits wear the name as a badge, defiant in a city that offers little else. The 5 Point slum is a patchwork of misery and mischief, its streets slick with grime and ambition. By day, you dodge pushcarts and the sharp elbows of street hawkers. By night, the gaslights flicker and the alleys fill with shadows. Every corner has its watchers, every stoop its secrets. The city's heart beats loudest here, in the crowded tenements where families squeeze six to a room, and the walls are thin enough to hear your neighbor's dreams or his nightmares. You take a moment to breathe in the atmosphere, if you can call it breathing. The scent is a cocktail of coal smoke, boiled cabbage, and cheap liquor, with a note of uncertainty that lingers at the back of your throat. Noise comes from every direction. The jangle of a piano in a saloon, a baby's cry, the distant clang of a blacksmith's hammer. But beneath it all runs a current of tension, like the hum of a telegraph wire stretched too tight. Turf is everything, and everyone is watching, waiting for someone to slip. In this world, survival is a matter of wits and alliances. You glance at Maggie's claws and wonder if you'd ever be brave or foolish enough to cross her. The stories say she's bitten off more than ears in a fight, and the evidence is hard to dispute. When she leans in to whisper a joke, even the streetwise Bowery boys would think twice before laughing first. Here, reputation is currency, and Maggie's is gold-plated. The absence of a real police force makes things interesting, to put it mildly. Early in the century, New York's idea of law and order was more wishful thinking than organized effort. If you needed help, you found it with your own kind, or you didn't find it at all. The city's so-called watchmen were more likely to look the other way than break up a brawl. Sometimes they joined in if the odds looked good. You learn quickly that justice is whatever you can hold on to, and the only real authority is the gang whose turf you're on. Every night you hear the city's pulse, the scrape of boots on cobblestones, the bark of a newsboy hawking yesterday's headlines, the warning shout before a fistfight. It's a symphony of survival, punctuated by the occasional crash of a saloon window or the sharp whistle of a lookout. The gangs, dead rabbits, Bowery boys and their ilk skirmish over scraps, their rivalries as old as the bricks themselves. Petty theft, protection rackets, and the odd act of vengeance keep the streets lively and the undertakers busy. You walk outside for a moment, boots sticking to something unidentifiable on the stoop. The night air is heavy with the promise of rain and the metallic tang of tension. Someone lurches past, face half hidden by a battered cap, and you instinctively check your pockets. You're learning the rhythms now, who belongs where, which corners to avoid, when to keep your head down, and when to fake bravado. The city is a chessboard, and every pawn dreams of being king, if only for a night. A sudden shout snaps your attention back to the alley behind the tavern. Two boys, no older than 12, are scrapping over a loaf of bread, their shouts echoing off brick walls. An older woman leans out of a window above, shaking a wooden spoon and cursing them in Irish. The influx of Irish Catholics has made the neighborhood even more crowded, and some native-born New Yorkers eye the newcomers with suspicion or outright resentment. You feel the tension ripple through the crowd, a subtle shift in posture, a few muttered words. It's not always about gangs and turf sometimes. It's just about who gets to eat. You edge back inside, drawn by the warmth and the promise of another story. The room has grown louder, voices rising and falling like the tides of the East River. Someone is singing a bawdy tune about a judge and a chimney sweep, and a few rabbit boys join in, off-key but full of heart. For a moment, the dangers outside seem distant, replaced by camaraderie and the clink of mismatched mugs. Even Maggie's grin softens, just a fraction, as she toasts to survival. Yours, hers, and anyone else tough enough to last another night in 5 Points. Suddenly, the back door bangs open, and a gust of wind scatters sawdust across the floor. The room falls silent as a new figure steps in, face hidden by the brim of a slouch hat. You feel every eye in the place shift, measuring, weighing, ready for trouble or a story worth hearing. You realize that in this world, every entrance might be a challenge or the first line of a new legend. The city is always watching, and so are you. Outside, the distant wail of a siren rises above the noise. Instinctively, you're swept up in the nervous energy of the room, and as the gang hustles to the door, you follow toward the looming silhouette of the Tombs prison, curiosity and caution warring in your gut. New York City, late night, outside the looming granite walls of the Tombs prison, with you squeezed in among a muttering crowd. The air is thick with the scent of wet cobblestones, sweat, and something sharper, cheap gin, and the faint metallic tang of fear. A siren wails in the distance, not the sleek police cruisers you might picture today, but the shrill, mechanical groan of a hand-cranked warning bell. You follow the flow of bodies, past flickering gaslights, and the huddled shadows of men who know precisely how short the trip is from these filthy streets to the cold stone cells inside. The Tombs rises before you, all sullen bulk and iron-barred windows, a place where the city's most notorious gang members pay the ultimate price for their infamy. There is no velvet curtain of secrecy here, only the hard echo of boots on stone and the low voices of guards swapping stories with the prisoners they can't quite control. Inside, everything smells of mildew and regret. You can almost taste the stale bread and gristle stew that passes for a meal, and you wonder how many legends have been born or broken within these walls. It's not lost on you that, in the early decades of the 19th century, New York City had no professional police force to keep order. The men charged with maintaining the peace were mostly watchmen and constables, often underpaid, sometimes drunk, and rarely effective when trouble erupted in the slums. The watchmen's lanterns might as well be paper toys in a neighborhood like 5 Points, where the rules change with every shift in the wind. If you listen closely, you can catch the scrape of a tin badge against a greasy lapel, the nervous shuffle of men who know that the gangs they're supposed to stop are sometimes their own neighbors or cousins. The Tombs holds a shifting cast of characters, but tonight the names that rattle through the iron bars are the kind that linger in both fear and awe. Someone whispers about the Bowery Boys, a gang as proud of their slicked-back hair and firemen's uniforms as they are of their fists. These men consider themselves defenders of native-born New York, fiercely opposed to the wave of Irish Catholic immigrants flooding into the city. Their leader's voice, rough and nasal, carries through the cell block as he tells a story of last Friday's brawl. You catch the punchline, and that's why you never trust a Bowery boy with your hat or your whiskey. The men around him erupt in laughter, the sound bouncing off the stone like a chorus of crows. But the Bowery Boys are only one part of the city's criminal tapestry. Down the hall, a member of the 40 Thieves, one of the first organized gangs in New York, leans against the wall, tracing the outline of a crude tattoo with a dirty thumb. By the late 1820s, the 40 Thieves had become infamous even outside the city, their exploits printed in newspapers as far away as Boston. You hear a muttered boast, "We had the run of Mulberry Street before the city bosses even knew the difference between a pickpocket and a politician." It's hard not to smirk at the comparison. In this place, the line between criminal and authority feels like it's drawn in chalk, smudged and easily erased. As you press closer, the air grows warmer, thick with the smell of unwashed bodies and the sour tang of spilled liquor. Every story traded behind these bars is a badge of honor, a reminder of turf won or lost. You glance at a battered wooden bench, its surface carved with initials, marks left behind by men who feared being forgotten more than they feared the judge's gavel. There's a moment when you catch the eye of a young man, no older than 16, his face a patchwork of bruises. He grins, missing a tooth, and asks if you want to hear how he outsmarted a constable with nothing but a loaf of bread and a clever lie. In this city, survival is as much about storytelling as it is about street smarts. Suddenly, a commotion breaks out down the corridor. 2 guards, red-faced and sweating, wrestle with an older prisoner whose shouts echo above the din. "You'll never break the 5 Points," he bellows. And for a split second, the entire cell block falls silent. The phrase hangs in the air, heavy as the iron doors that slam shut a moment later. You feel the weight of those words, the stubborn pride of a neighborhood that refuses to be tamed, no matter how many locks the city throws at it. Here's the twist. The Tombs is not just a prison, it's a stage. Every night, the same dramas play out. Gang rivalries, secret deals, and the endless negotiation of power. The guards know as much about the gangs as the gangs know about them. Sometimes it feels as if the only thing separating the men in uniforms from the men in rags is which side of the bars they wake up on. That's the real consequence of life in 5 Points. For a moment, you step back and take in the scene. The air hums with stories, some true, some as slippery as eelskin. The Tombs is a crucible, forging legends and ghosts in equal measure. you realize that the price of infamy is not just the cold, cramped darkness of these cells, but the way your name is whispered long after the locks have turned. The city outside might change, horse-drawn carts giving way to rattling trolleys, tenements swallowing alleys whole. But inside these walls, the old rivalries and alliances remain, echoing through the ironwork like a melody only the desperate can hear. You lean against the wall, feeling the rough stone under your hand, and wonder what stories will be told about tonight. The cell block slowly quiets, save for the clink of chains and the occasional burst of muffled laughter. Outside, the city's restless energy presses in, promising that tomorrow's headlines will carry new names, new rivalries, and the same old hunger for notoriety. And as the guards make their rounds, lanterns casting long shadows on the floor, you sense the uneasy truce that settles in for the night. The cost of survival here is steep, but the cost of being forgotten is steeper. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the sounds and smells wash over you. And you know that even in the darkest corners of the tombs, the fight for identity never really ends. As dawn breaks over the battered rooftops, you walk the same streets, echoes of old rivalries still humming beneath the city's modern roar. A member of the 40 Thieves, one of the first organized gangs in New York. 5 Points, New York City. Dawn. The faintest sunlight seeps between slats of warped shutters, catching on soot-streaked windows and the last wisps of night fog. Your boots scrape along the cobbled street, scuffed but sturdy, carrying you through a place that smells of yesterday's rain, cheap gin, and the lingering spirit of a city that refuses to sleep. You move past the tenements, their red brick faces melted to grey by decades of coal smoke and sorrow. Laundry lines crisscross the alleyways, limp with shirts and stockings, like the city's own battle flags. The air still carries the sharp tang of spilled whiskey, mixed with the earthy note of horses and the sourness of too many bodies packed into too little space. You can almost hear the laughter and curses spilling from the old saloons, ghosts of a night that never completely ends in these streets. This is the last page of the 5 Point story, a place where, once, the very ground seemed to rumble with the bootfall of rival gangs. The Dead Rabbits, for example, were notorious for their flair. Picture it. A parade of brash young men surging down Bayard Street, hoisting a dead rabbit skewered on a broken pike, daring anyone to question their claim. It was less about the animal and more about the message. In a world where identity meant survival, you broadcasted your loyalties as loud as you could, even if that meant carrying a grisly mascot through enemy territory. You cut through the old Mulberry Bend, where the city's contrasts press in on every side. The 19th century streets were a living contradiction. Opulent mansions just blocks from squalid hovels, charity soup kitchens shadowed by private clubs. On one corner, a banker's carriage might roll by, wheels spattered with the same mud that coated bootblacks and pickpockets alike. Back then, the city's roar was not just carriages and commerce, but a chorus of accents, Irish, German, Italian, and the homegrown dialect of the 5 Points itself. You are surrounded by faces that would have been at home in a Jacob Riis photograph, sharp cheekbones, wary eyes, hands quick to offer help or demand your wallet. This is the New York that invented the phrase melting pot, though it sometimes felt more like a cauldron that boiled overnightly. A sudden clang draws your attention. Someone drops a tin pail from a fire escape. You flinch, half expecting the 40 thieves to round the corner. By the late 1820s, their name had traveled far beyond these blocks, whispered as far away as Philadelphia. They were the original 5 Points instigators, pickpocketing and brawling in ways that made even seasoned police wince. The 40 thieves didn't just steal. They defined the word gang for a new American century. At this hour, the city is a study in contrasts. A milkman's cart rattles by, and across the street, a pair of ragged boys dart between stoops, eyes scanning for coin or opportunity. You catch a whiff of stale bread from a bakery's basement window. The city's hunger, both literal and metaphorical, is everywhere. Survival here is a game of inches and instincts. Sometimes the names themselves told the story. The Dead Rabbits, what a moniker. Some say it was a badge of pride, a symbol of grit. Others claim it was just slang, a term bandied about for any youth wild enough to cause trouble. In the 5 Points, even your gang's name could get you killed or make you a legend. Halfway down Worth Street, the buildings lean in as if to listen. You remember stories of turf wars, where the lines between blocks were drawn with fists, clubs, and the occasional brick. The tension was always there, humming beneath the clatter of hooves and the shouts of market sellers. There was a code, unwritten but ironclad. You looked out for your own, and you never let fear show on your face. Here comes the first twist. As you step into what was once the heart of gang territory, a modern city worker hoses down the sidewalk, erasing last night's grime. For a moment, you see both worlds at once, the old 5 Points, wild and lawless, and the new city, ever hungry to scrub away its past. It's a jarring overlap, like seeing a scar beneath fresh skin. The consequence is simple. The city changes, but its pulse never stops. You pause beside a battered lamppost, running your hand over cold iron. The sound of distant traffic blends with an imagined echo. The raucous cheer of a Dead Rabbits rally, the clipped shouts of the Bowery boys, each group eager to stake its claim. The rivalry between these gangs was no myth. It was lived reality, written in bruises and broken windows. Sometimes, the only thing separating you from harm was the insignia on your cap or the cadence of your accent. A stray dog noses through trash, scattering cabbage leaves and battered shoes. The city's strays, both human and animal, have always known how to survive here. You think about how gangs offered more than just protection. They gave you family, a sense of belonging when the rest of the city saw you as just another mouth to feed or another problem to solve. That hunger for identity, for a place in the world, is what kept these streets alive long after the dust settled. Another twist arrives, subtle but sharp. You realize the boundaries that once divided the gangs have blurred, replaced by new lines, subway routes, luxury condos, neighborhoods renamed and rebuilt. The consequence is clear. The city reclaims its space, yet the memory of old rivalries lingers beneath the surface, shaping how people walk, talk, and dream. You glance upward. The skyline is different now, but the shadows still fall the same way in the early morning. The city never forgets. Its grit is not just physical, but woven into the stories passed from one generation to the next. The 5 Points may be gone, but its influence is everywhere, from the swagger of a Wall Street broker to the rhythm of a midnight subway ride. A single sentence sums it up. The old gangs are history, but the city's hunger for identity endures. You keep moving, boots echoing against stone. The city feels quieter now, as if the ghosts have finally grown tired. But as you pass the last crumbling stoop, you sense something else, a kind of gratitude. The 5 Points were never just about crime or chaos. They were about survival, about carving out a place in a world that wanted to forget you. A final twist. Just as you reach the edge of the old neighborhood, you spot a street vendor setting up shop, whistling a tune that might have been heard a century ago. The consequence is gentle but resonant. The city's pulse is carried forward in small, everyday acts, in the resilience of those who refuse to be forgotten. As the sun climbs higher, painting the city gold, you realize that you're now part of this living history. You carry the stories, the scars, and the stubborn hope that kept the 5 Points alive. The grime may have faded, but the hunger remains. And as you step into the roar of modern New York, you know the shadows of the 5 Points still shape every heartbeat of the city. This is how the story ends, not with a bang, but with the steady, unbreakable rhythm of survival. You walk on, and the city walks with you.